Your voice, your opinion, your community. Fact TV, free speech, protected.
Chris Roberts. Welcome to The Long Road. I'm your host, Chris Roberts. I bet you've heard, if you listen to the radio, the YMCA commercials, we're celebrating Juneteenth holiday. For a lot of people, they've never heard of it. All it is another federal holiday. What was the reason for Juneteenth becoming a federal holiday? It all depends. Some people go and say, wait a minute, it was done politically because of Black Lives Matters, George Floyd, and a whole bunch of things. Well, politics did play a big part in making this a federal holiday, and it was because of one of the things, the George Floyd killing, the Brown killing in Ferguson, Mississippi, the couple of the killings, one was in Tennessee, and I think another one was in Kentucky. The American people were at rage. It wasn't just black people that were enraged. There was white people, people of color. There was a lot of people enraged because they did not feel safe being around policemen. But you know what? We like to lump things together, especially the media. The vast percentage of the policemen that we have around the country do it because they want to help people. They do a lot of things. They save lives. They help children. They bust drug dealers. They bust people that domestically abuse their spouses. They bust people who use the internet and everything and prey on young kids, both boys and girls. There is a lot of positive that policemen around the country do. But it's rarely ever talked about. And so the two white guys who decided they were going to shoot a black guy because he was jogging. George Floyd, yes, he was a criminal, had a long criminal record. He used drugs and everything. But that did not give any policeman or any person the right to take his life away. Okay. The one where the paramedic was killed because the police went in the wrong apartment. They were basing on faulty information. Bingo. Or the correction facility and policemen down in Mississippi, I think it was either Mississippi or Alabama, that was abusing and beating up inmates and making jokes of it. Those are rotten apples. Those do not represent the whole force. Just like in Vietnam, Lieutenant Calley and his group went and killed over 100 Vietnamese citizens. They would have killed more if it wasn't from heroic actions of the helicopter pilot and other people getting in the way. Well, Lieutenant Calley was a bad actor. His people did what they did because of his crappy or lack of leadership. Okay? Those are outliers. And those outliers always get the news. And what happens is there are no more Paul Harvey moments where the rest of the story. For us old enough that knew Paul Harvey, we would listen to him on the radio. He would say something and give you a little story. And a lot of times your story may be stirring this way or that way. And then they would have a commercial. Paul Harvey would say, hey, right after the commercial break, I'll be back with the rest of the story. And when he gave the rest of the story, it was amazing how many of us were wrong because we used our biases to come out with the rest of the story. And, well, Juneteenth became a national holiday because of George Floyd and some other things. And like I said, with Black Lives Matters. Basically, you had a lot of companies, corporations donating money and everything. They weren't donating money out of, oh, this is the right thing to do. They were donating money because they didn't want to lose business or they wanted to gain business. They were making business decisions. Colleges and companies, diversity, equity, equality, all of a sudden they were hiring people that were controlling diversity, equity, and I can't even remember the other one. And so we ended up having 2 or 3 really bad years. Some people were supporting it. Other people didn't want to go and say, oh, you're racist. You're doing this because you're white supremacy. And you go, wait a minute. I grew up poor. I grew up on welfare. I really didn't have any power. So how do you say I have white supremacy? So you're saying if I grew up poor, white, projects, then you get a big job that's paying 6 figures in a college or in a company to be in a diversity position. You are turning around and saying, oh, you're where you are because of white supremacy. That causes a little problem. If I'm all the way down and I'm on the ladder of success, I'm not even on the first rung. You're up here in this one, and you're saying, I'm with here. I'm where I am because of white supremacy, and even thought if I'm black and I'm on ladder 10, I turn around and say to this guy who hasn't got to rung 1, you know, if it wasn't for white supremacy and people like you, I could be on rung 12. So this stuff was going on, tearing the country apart. Democrats were doing one thing, Republicans were doing another, ultra-liberals saying we're not doing enough, conservatives saying this, back and forth on one group on the color people of color side. Most of them were doing financially well off. And so again, you have Democrats and Republicans fighting, you have liberals and you have conservatives fighting. Both of those groups were benefiting it really well. Financially, they were writing books. There was a white woman that was charging tens of thousands of dollars to give a presentation on white supremacy. There was a woman, I think she was down at Mount Holyoke, got very famous because he came a list of what was white supremacists and what was the male-dominant society. So it was like in politics, never let an opportunity go by. Well, a lot of people did not let the opportunity to make a lot of money during this period. Well, I didn't see money to make inner city schools better, get better housing for people of color, for poor people. There was a lot of talk, but no money went there. The schools didn't get better. The standards for teachers in these places didn't get better. They were still hiring unqualified teachers. Some places were still looking the other way when drugs were being sold. And so in this whole mixed up, mashed up thing over that 3-year period, then it was determined that, you know what, on the Democrat and liberal sides, this would probably help us if we create a national holiday. Because, you know what, we can go to the Republicans and say, if you don't support this, you're racist, you're white supremacist, and go back and forth. Okay? It was end up being a political argument for who can get the best. And so what? We give them a holiday, but we really don't change their standard of living. We don't educate them. So we don't give them better education. We don't give them better opportunities. But you know what? It's a photo op for us, and it's a photo op for other politicians. It's a photo op for black leaders. It's just a big photo op. Okay? Yes, the city of Keene and the Y, they did a really good job in trying to get across how important Juneteenth holiday is, not only to black people and people who are descendants of slaves and descendants of free, basically at that time, Negro, basically they were freemen, they were called Negroes, they were all different ways. The census would say free Negroes, free mulattoes, and it would be all those, but it meant something to those people and their dependents. Okay, should Juneteenth be a holiday? In my opinion, yes, it should be a holiday because it's important to the fabric and the culture of the United States. Should it have been a political advantage to one or another? No. Basically, when it came down, I found a way to do something politically advantageous to me while manipulating the other side. Because I don't want the other side to take the black vote. That's the part that really kind of irritates me. Almost every single thing that politicians do isn't to benefit the average person in the United States. It's to benefit them. It is to keep them in their office. It is to increase and enhance their power. And I'm going to give you 2 examples because, and what I'm going to say about Juneteenth, it's probably going to be a lot different than what you heard, the very little you heard, because it's rarely in books, history books or anything. And a lot of our reporters, they don't want to dig deep. You know what? And so we're going to start with the president's handout from the White House. And in this it goes, the long history of our new federal holiday, Juneteenth. Boy, it's a tough word to pronounce because it's not really a word, but it just added on extra syllables. And it starts, on June 19, 1865, over 250,000 enslaved people in Galveston, Texas, received news of the emancipation, marking a significant milestone in American history. This pivotal event commences the birth of Black Independence Day, a celebration embraced by African Americans across the country. Now look at this. On June 19, 1865, over 250,000 enslaved people in Galveston, Texas. This is coming from the White House. In 1865, there wasn't even 250,000 people in Galveston. But the White House is saying on June 19, 1865, over 250,000 enslaved people in Galveston, Texas, received news of the emancipation. So the first sentence in this press release is wrong. It is wrong. Okay? Following the end of the Civil War, Juneteenth celebrations emerged as a tradition among formerly enslaved individuals and their families. These celebrations initially took place in Texas, but spread to other states where Black communities arrived. All right. And they would be storytelling, singing, games, barbecues. On June 17, 2021, President Biden signed with members of Congress the Juneteenth National Independence Day Act at the White House. Recognizing Juneteenth as a federal holiday also gives Americans the opportunity to contemplate the complex process of emancipation that took place after President Abraham Lincoln announced the Emancipation Proclamation on September 22nd, 1865, when the Union General Gordon Granger arrived in Galveston, Texas, and demanded that the state's 250 plus enslaved people be set free. Okay? Who proofreads this? Over 250,000 enslaved people in Galveston, Texas. And it says over here, when the Union General arrived in Galveston, Texas, and demanded that the state's 250 plus enslaved people be set free. Okay, wait a minute. You have 250,000 plus in Galveston, and then you have 250,000 plus in the state. He arrived in Galveston, Texas, and demanded that the state's 250 plus enslaved people be set free. So, Texas is a pretty big state. So if I look at this, if there's 250 plus slaves in Galveston, but then he says there's 250 plus, he arrives in Galveston and demands that the 250,000 plus slave people be set free. So if there's 250,000 plus in Galveston, how many more slaves are there in Texas? You have 250,000 plus, 250,000 plus. So where is that plus? Did he come in and say, yes, all you 250,000 slaves in Galveston are free? Or he says, I came into Galveston and I said 250,000 plus slaves in the state of Texas are free. And to communicate this demand, he read General Order Number 3. The people of Texas are informed that in accordance with a proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the connection here, therefore, existing between them becomes employer and hired labor. The free men are advised to remain quietly at their present home and work for wages. In other words, enslaved people in Galveston, Texas did not know about Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. So what the White House is saying, basically almost, here it is, you're in Galveston, Texas, a major seaport on the Gulf Coast. For 2.5 years, slave owners in Texas were able to keep any information whatsoever about the Emancipation Proclamation, which said any slave in a state that's an open rebellion against the United States is here now free. Lincoln, Texas was an open revolt. On September 22nd, 1862, President Lincoln said, all the slaves in Texas are hereby free. And so, would you be able to go and convince me that for 2.5 years, none of that word got through Texas? Not through the seaports, not through northern Texas, not through Mexico. That's one of the reasons Texas fought for independence, because Mexico outlawed slavery. So if Mexico outlawed slavery and Lincoln is given the Emancipation Proclamation, wouldn't the Mexican ambassador to the United States want to pass that word down to the people in Mexico, can then pass that word up to Texas so slaves could run away into Mexico and be free, just like slaves went into Canada to become free people? Okay. Yes, December 6th, 1865, that's when the 13th Amendment passed, and it said, okay, you cannot be enslaved unless you commit a crime and you go to prison. But Juneteenth is not just about building historical awareness and self-education, it's also clearly a holiday for Black Americans. It was only a year after the events at Galveston that formerly enslaved Black people and their family began gathering and celebrating this freedom. These celebrations involve religious services, storytelling events, in certain places where former slaves or descendants of slaves would go in and go to the places, these celebrations in rags. Because when they were slaves, they were forbidden to wear a lot of good clothes, and they were always dressed, a lot of them were just dressed in rags, the bare minimum, some to basically cover their private parts. And then they would take the rags off, throw the rags in the river, the symbolism of being free, slavery being washed away, and they put new clothes on, dignified clothes on. Oops. And see where it goes right here. While celebrations of Juneteenth go back to 1866, to make Juneteenth a federal holiday is fairly recent. Juneteenth celebrations revived during the Civil Rights of 1860, but it was only last year that U.S. Representative Sheila Jackson, Democratic Texas, pushed for a federal recognition during the height of the summer's Black Lives Matter protest. The bill didn't make it through Congress, but this year Representative Jackson Lee proved differently. I think Juneteenth tells a wonderful story. It's a story of freedom. It happened 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, but it also set a pathway to freedom, who we are as a nation. If you're frightened about liberty, if you're frightened about freedom and liberation and joy. Again, it's from the White House. Okay, the Emancipation Proclamation, September 22nd, 1862. 2 years brings me up to September 1864. But the general did not arrive in Galveston for another 9 months, almost another year. And then you had some different celebrations. So the celebrations started taking place 3 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. And so we have people that go to Columbia, Harvard, Stanford, to go into communications, to be top-notch writers and stuff. We have some posted some of the best and brightest working in the White House. No, for Bush, for Obama, for Trump, for Biden. But this is the presidential seal, the White House, the president's picture on it. It contains numerous mistakes. And then, like I said, it came across as political. It should not have been political. Oh, this was started because in the heights of Black Lives Matters and but it still sets a pathway of freedom, who we are as a nation. If you are frightened about freedom and liberation and joy, why does the sponsor of making this a federal holiday come up and say, you know, slavery ended almost 160 years ago in the United States, but I'm making it say, you know, we have to be careful. If we don't fight, we don't defend our liberty, we're going back to slavery in the United States. Again, you have something based on its own merit, should be a national holiday. But it became political, and it tried to instill fear into the American people. That little quote should have never been in here. These mistakes should have never been in here. You get paid a lot of money to be a speechwriter or to write things for the president. And so so when you sit down and you look at some of the stuff and you go, wow, what about this? What about that? Let's take a deeper dive into and we'll go into this one. Someone who knows about history, works at the University in Texas. She's a Haitian, and I first discovered Black history through my mother's stories of our Haitian heritage and culture traditions that she brought to the country in the mid-'60s. As I grew older, my interest in history expanded. The more I found out, the deeper I yearned to go. Slowly, I came to realize that history was not about the past. The stories it tells us make sense of the here and now and might shape the future. I became a professor by teaching. My teaching and research interests firmly planted in the 20th century civil rights. In 2015, I accepted a position at the University at Texas at Austin. So she was not a diversity hire. She was there before Black Lives Matters, and she was able to get a position at one of the best colleges or universities in the country. As she studied history there, she studied more and more into the Juneteenth to find out what actually was. I witnessed a few celebrations in Austin, which Black Texans acknowledge the day's importance, but also wrestle with the contradictions, knowing that the real freedoms had not in fact been achieved that day in Galveston. It was still a work in progress. While Texans celebrated Juneteenth with a particular zeal, many Americans still did not have the faintest clue of its origin, historical impact, or contemporary renaissance. But again, you go in and you're writing to your group, and so you put things in to, quote unquote, give you more impact. George Floyd's public execution by former Minneapolis police officer Derek on May 25th, 2020, sparked months of demonstrations that swelled into one of the largest social justice movements in American history, eliciting an unprecedented collective outpour of racial grief. Against this backdrop, I was one of many who began to examine Juneteenth anew, and I published a CNN opinion poll article, Make Juneteenth a National Holiday Now, arguing in part that the Juneteenth offers America a new origin. In some ways, Juneteenth can be read as a response to Frederick Douglass's 1852 speech, what to the slave is the 4th of July? Less than 13 months after George Floyd's death, Juneteenth became a federal holiday. A significant event in American history, drawing the country one step closer to publicly acknowledging its original sin of slavery. But what a lot of people don't seem to understand, they don't study history. Georgia, when it was founded, the colony of Georgia, charter said no slavery. Virginia wanted no slavery. North Carolina wanted no slavery. You know why they had slavery? Because one of the biggest transporters of slaves was Great Britain. Great Britain was making money hand over fist due to slavery, selling slaves. Okay? So that's why slavery was dying out and would have died out if King of George would have listened to the demands of the colonies. Okay? After the Revolutionary War, a deal was cut. You know who cut that deal? Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, Connecticut. And they cut it with states like South Carolina. And that's where the deal was. We were allowed to import slaves up until 1808. You know why? You know who was making a lot of money importing slaves? The ship owners, the shipbuilders, the insurance companies, a whole bunch of stuff. We're making money in the New England area by importing slaves. Second, they don't tell us that the Civil War, General Lee did not command all the troops. He commanded the Army of Northern Virginia. There was a different army in the Southeast. There was a different Confederate army in the West. They did not coordinate with each other. So when General Lee surrendered at Appomattox to General Grant, that did not end the war. That ended the war that General Grant and General Lee had operational control of. Okay? It comes across and you go, yeah, you have a battle outside of Brownsville, Texas. That was the last major battle of the Civil War. Not the last battle, but the last major battle. Without the forceful appearance of Union soldiers, black Texans had remained in prison within the convoluted clutches of the dying Confederacy. The story of how General Order 3 was relayed to Galveston vary, But Granger most likely read the order aloud in a public meeting designed to spread the message to many as possible. The words "all slaves are free" served as a declaration of independence for some and a provocation to others. Granger and his troops often encountered a violent, anxious, fearful, and vengeful white population, including Confederate soldiers and sympathizers who engaged in reckless attacks and looting in part of Texas. Granger's order was based loosely on Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, which made slavery unconstitutional but wasn't ratified until December 6, 1865. So, slavery, you can try to say it's unconstitutional. The attempt of the 13th Amendment was, but until the amendment was passed by 3/4 of the state, it wasn't unconstitutional. It was just, under Abraham Lincoln, it said places in the warring and open rebellion against the United States. But it created a problem. What happens to slavery when the states become part of the Union again? That answer was taken by September 30th. The order first declared that formerly enslaved were free based on the absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between black people and those who had assumed legal ownership of them. This is the happy news on which most July celebrations are based. It is an oversimplified tale of what happened that day. A common belief that both in black and white communities that black folks in Galveston and around Texas were slow to hear or fully grasp about the Civil War and then the arrival. Like I said, Galveston was a big seaport. As the Union Army moved down south, a lot of plantation owners moved west into Texas with their slaves because they didn't want to lose their slaves. They didn't want the slaves to be set free. So to say that none of the slaves knew about the Emancipation Proclamation is a false. There's no way you can prove that. Some portions of Texas, especially those working in the port of Galveston, knew that the tide of war had long turned in favor of the Union. They also probably caught wind of the Emancipation Proclamation for travelers disembarking on the wharf. Further, they likely heard that what most had seemed to be fantastic tales about regiments of black soldiers in the Union Army. News of the impending freedom had almost certainly reached the other parts of Texas where enslaved African Americans from the Deep South were transported to the Lone Star. Texas was a haven for white slave owners free in Louisiana and other Confederacy being conquered. Okay. Again, a choice word. Now it's saying the Union, the United States, was conquering Alabama, Mississippi, North Carolina, Florida. They weren't conquering them. They were bringing them back into the fold. But when we read the general order said, the relationship between former masters and enslaved were now involved into a vague contract between employee and hired labor. The freemen were advised to remain quietly in their present homes and work for wages, read the order. But how could, they call them black Texans, but how could former slaves enjoy freedom while remaining on the plantations? Where would they be allowed to leave, travel, or reunite? They were forbidden from becoming entrepreneurs and landowners. Because part of it was, okay, you're free now, but you must stay on the plantation. You must work for the plantation owner. You're not allowed to leave. You're not allowed to leave Texas. You're not allowed. You must stay on. And so, and oh, by the way, you're going to have to pay rent for the house. You're going to have to pay more money for the food. And I'll give you a few pittance. But you must stay. So the proclamation wasn't really beneficial to the former slaves in Texas. It was a heck of a lot beneficial to the plantation owners. Now the former slaves had to pay for their food, their meal, the housing, and I only have to pay them a few cents. So it was a money winner for me as a plantation owner because, hey, I got all these workers. They can't leave. And I determine how much I'm going to pay them. If I want to pay them a penny a pound, hey, if I want to pay them a half a penny a pound, it doesn't matter. Where are they going to go? They can't go work for anybody else. Basically, when in the other part of the country, when the Union armies came in, blacks went like crazy to get to the Union, where the Union posts were and everything. A bunch joined the army. A lot went to work. Yes, some of them went to, they were sanitation workers. Other ones were building bunkers and berms and everything. But they were earning money, not a lot, but they had freedom of movement. You know what the general went in Texas? Will not be supported in idleness on military posts anywhere and elsewhere was an astonishment, suggesting that they could not rely on federal troops where the Texans were seeking protection, searching for news about family and friends, looking for work or in need of food. The troops were there to enforce liberation, but they were not necessarily supporting those trying to carve out a new life. That's why even after Granger's arrival, former slaves responded to the news of freedom cautiously, fearing reprisal. Yet as the word spread, some did walk away from plantations, others rejoiced and stayed put while planning their next move. Hey, me, if I'm 18, 19, 20, and I'm a slave and now they say I'm free, I have 2 feet and I'm on my way. I'm not working for the guy that's enslaved me since I was a little kid or bought me on the slave market and then decides that he's going to bring me all the way from Texas to Louisiana so I'll never get to see my family again. No, I'm not going to do that. Fears among former slaves were often brought out. In the ensuing months, the beginning of the period that would be known as Reconstruction, racial violence spread. In one town, white Texans whipped dozens of formerly enslaved people who celebrated the news of emancipation too enthusiastic. White attacks against free blacks range from verbal harassment and intimidation to physical assault and even murder. Black Texans in Galveston and other parts of the states navigated a new landscape, at times more dangerous and violent than the ones they left behind. Again, we're using the word landscape. The people weren't allowed, the former slaves weren't allowed to get up and go. All that changed was the dynamics. I'm no longer responsible for you, and if I'm a white guy, you ain't taking my job. if I'm a store owner, you're not going to open a store and just sell to black people. I want those black people to come to my store so that I can overcharge them. That was the environment. So in a lot of ways, they were given freedom, but they lost protection of the law, protection of the plantation owner, because prior to that, to the plantation owner, these were investment properties. These were like machines. These were like John Deere, whatever. I want to get the most out of these teams. Granger's emancipation announcement, racial discrimination became embedded in the public policy and propagated unequal housing and employment opportunities. Wealth gaps, educational, residential segregation, police brutality, and political defriendation. You're not allowed to vote. Black codes in Texas and throughout the South prevent African Americans from voting, secure a fair labor contract, attending racially integrated public schools or own land. For many years after Granger arrived in Galveston, freedom could not be publicly enjoyed in some parts of Texas, even on Juneteenth itself. The Lawrence Thomas, a Galveston native, also received an invitation to the White House. Also, although without the fanfare that accompanied Lee's visit, Thomas's roots in Galveston trace back to the days of slavery. Michael Menard, one of the founders of Galveston, owned Thomas's great-great-grandfather. Thomas's ancestors helped build the city and were there when Granger stepped onto the land. His father began organizing Juneteenth celebration in the city roughly 4 decades ago. So again, you had some celebrations that started in 1866, and then, like the paper qualities, they kind of phased off, and then they started coming back. So like here, Lawrence Thomas, whose great-great-grandfather helped build the city, was a slave, and helped build the city of Galveston, and some, while we're there, probably building the wharfs, and working with ships and a whole bunch of other stuff. A lot of them died of yellow fever, other stuff by working in the swampland and things like that. So, Juneteenth is an important day. But it's a day of celebration, a solemn day, but it shouldn't be politicized. Yeah, I don't talk too very well at the end of the week. This is Friday instead of the normal Wednesday. History is written based on who you want to sell the book to. If you have a group of people that believe this, you are not going to write anything, or maybe a little things that goes against their belief, or they're not going to buy the book. You got to write a liberal history, and you got to write a conservative history. Writing history in the middle doesn't sell. It's like being to the conservatives, we lost Vietnam. We lost Korea. We lost Iraq. We lost Syria. We lost Afghanistan. No way in the world they're going to buy a lot of those books. Those books will be in the bargain basement in the dollar store probably within a month. Now, if you write to the liberals, they'll buy those. They'll say we're spending too much money in the military, this way, and this way, and we're not getting the bang for our buck. We're not getting successful. Well, we didn't win any of those wars or conflicts or whatever you want to call them because we had crappy political leadership and we had crappy military leadership. Again, it was all political. And the media went along with it. Vietnam didn't change until the media says, oh, maybe Gulf of Tonkin resolution, oh, that's pretty bogus. The Iraq thing didn't change until they go, oh, Abu Ghraib, and we got some of these things. Oh, that's pretty bogus. But in both cases, the media was both supporting those conflicts because it was the right thing to do. But when it started switching, instead of not telling all the truth this way, they decided not to tell all the truth that way. And that's what irritates me. Not only do they don't want to tell the truth, but a lot of schools, colleges, you pay $100,000 and you're taught not to critically think. If you do not critically think, I own you. Because if you can't critically think, you don't know if I'm lying to you or not. And like I told people, don't believe everything I say, fact check it for yourself. Thank you.